Hey, welcome everybody. We're going to give folks a couple of minutes here to trickle in. As you know, it takes a little bit of time to get everybody logged on, but welcome back to the fall webinar series for the Master Beef program. Tonight we have a great speaker, Mr. Kevin Thompson. We're going to let him get started here in a few minutes on talking about low stress handling. But if you have been watching the webinars live, you'll know, just as a housekeeping item, that at the end there's a survey for you to take. That survey will pop up in your browser if you watch this live, pop up at the end. It's just a quick 4-question survey. And if you don't get to take it tonight, it will come in an email to you tomorrow. And we'd love to get your feedback just on the webinar series in general, and our speakers that we have, just so we can know how we're doing and make any changes that we need to. If you are watching this recorded, so if you're watching this on demand or have gone back to watch the recording, you will not get a survey link emailed directly to you. That's just because of the way that it's set up in the Zoom system. And certainly if you want to provide feedback, we can send you a link to an external survey, which is the same survey questions. You just won't get that auto-populated email from the Zoom system. So I think there has been a little bit of confusion with that. I just want to make sure everybody knows that the survey does not count as your attendance credit. Either being here live, watching at a county office, or watching the recorded webinar will be your attendance, and the survey is just extra. So don't worry too much if you don't get to take the survey. Just being here and watching is what will get your attendance credit counted for Master Beef. So with that, I'm sure there'll be a few more people joining us, but we can go ahead and get started here. Like I mentioned, we have Mr. Kevin Thompson with us tonight. Kevin is the director of the Middle Tennessee Research and Education Center, and just a really great person to work with, always supportive of our research and educational efforts there at the station. And if you have seen a presentation or heard him talk, you know that he is great at low stress handling. And so that's what he's going to share with us tonight. And I'm just going to turn it over to you, Kevin, and let you get started.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Mason. And it's always a pleasure to work with you and all the other PIs and researchers and extension specialists from the University of Tennessee. And as Dr. Mason said, I'm here in Spring Hill, Tennessee, and also in Lewisburg at the Middle Tennessee Research and Education Centers. Here at this facility, we have 1,265 acres, and the one in Lewisburg, which will be out tomorrow for a field day. So if you guys are around Lewisburg tomorrow, beginning around 9 o'clock, stop in. But we've got 615 acres there where we house the Tennessee Beef Heifer Development Center. But here in Spring Hill, where we do the vast majority of our beef cattle research and demonstration trials, we've got about 250 brood cows. We also run a stocker program, and we also manage and facilitate the University of Tennessee bull testing program. So we've got a lot of cattle on site that actually we do actual production and best management practices with them. As you know, there's a lot that goes on with managing cattle throughout the year, and we'll cover a lot of that. But we also have the opportunity to conduct research trials. So the cattle that we manage, we probably handle about twice as much or even 3 times as much as just the average cow herd, within the United States, because we're doing research trials to hopefully benefit you as producers, ultimately making your programs more efficient and effective. So you can imagine that we probably annoy the cattle a lot, right? Well, one of my passions in life, and it started off as a very young person, growing up in a ranching environment and having the opportunity to participate in the management of about 1,100 mama cows, is following my granddad and my dad around in managing cattle really in a low stress manner, and really thinking about it from a stockmanship and a stewardship approach. So we're going to cover a little bit of that today in this portion of the Master Beef program. And I would just like to start off by stating this is just a purposeful discussion. And it's a discussion, and so please be thinking of questions as we go throughout this. And at the end, we'll have the opportunity to maybe interact and answer some of the questions that you have. But really, we just want to talk about how can we reduce stress, not only in the animal, but in us as the handler, because really it's a 1+1 scenario that adds up to 2. And the first thing and the most important thing I think that we face is safety. Within the agricultural industry, regardless if you're a row crop producer or a cow-calf producer, or in the hog industry or the small ruminant industry, we have the privilege of including everyone in the family. So we've got the 5-year-old out there, great-great-grandchild or great-grandchild with the 95-year-old great-grandfather. And within the industry, and statistics show us those young people under the age of 14 and those people that are a bit more senior above the age of 65 tend to get hurt more often. And a lot of that is simply impacted by the way that we handle livestock. So we want to ensure safety for both the animal and us as the handler. Also, I'll often talk about additive behavior, or the additive behavior impact that we have on the cattle that we handle. So really, basically all that is, the way we handle cattle today impacts how they act toward us, the handler, tomorrow and the next day and the next day. So we need to keep that in mind, the additive behavior effect. And we're going to talk about that, and you'll hear me mention that throughout the presentation several times tonight. And one of the things that's probably more important now than it ever has been in the history of agriculture is each and every one of us have a responsibility to be a positive advocate for the industry. So I always ask folks to raise their hand, and I honestly can't see you raise your hand now since we're online. But how many people have an operation which includes pastures and even working facilities that are along a county road? Well, many times when I ask that, way over half of the audience will raise their hand, and that's so true. So if we're doing things that may appear inappropriate, if we're chasing cattle or doing something that may, raise eyebrows with really a public that doesn't necessarily understand production practices, they have the opportunity to catch that on camera. All our cell phones have wonderful video recorders on them and cameras on them. And then that could be misconstrued, or even if it's just someone gets an idea, well, they're mistreating those cattle. So anytime that we have the opportunity to handle our cattle gives us the opportunity to manage those cattle in a way that makes us a positive advocate for the industry that we truly have a privilege. It's a privilege to be involved in, and that's the really production of protein, not only for our state, but our country and the world. So it's a great industry that we're in, and we want to make sure we do our part in being positive advocates for it. Also, stress impacts things that really matter from an economic standpoint. And I know each and every one of us want to break even or make a profit each and every year. I can't say that we all do that, right? But we want to do as good a job as we can from an economic standpoint. And stress impacts reproduction. Cortisol, the hormone of stress, has a negative impact on really conception rates and even retaining pregnancies. Stress on cattle affects their ability to grow effectively and efficiently. So it's going to impact average daily gain in weight per day of age. We see that a tremendous amount through the bull test. If we've got bulls that tend to be a little bit poor in disposition, those bulls are often standoffish and don't come to the feed bunks until we calm those bulls down throughout our handling practices and get them comfortable in coming to the feed bunks and stocker programs as well. Herd health, stress impacts the immune system. We hear that often, right? We as humans, when we're stressed, we tend to get colds because we have a poor immune response to some of the negative bacteria or viruses that may try to affect our immune system. Carcass quality can be impacted. I know we've all heard of dark cutters. Those cattle get discounted. really significantly when hung on the rail at harvest time. And then we talk about 2 times the safety, right? So that goes back to not only safety of us, the handler, but safety for the livestock that we're handling. And that really does impact the economics of an operation. Just recently, I've had a very close friend that was hurt in a livestock accident. Well, he broke several ribs and was in the hospital for quite some time. Well, that has economic impact on the family. And then ultimately, it's the enjoyment, right? So we're in this industry that some people too often wonder, well, why in the world are they doing that? So I don't know how many times I've missed Christmas parties in mid to late December because I was out, assisting with a fall calving cow that was having difficulty, or I was out feeding, or it came a snowstorm or something like that. So we truly have to enjoy what we're doing because we often are put into some very adverse weather conditions to take care of the cattle because they honestly, we do this because they can't take care of themselves. So we need to enjoy what we're doing. And if we do it in a low stress manner and train our cattle to be handled properly and react to us in a way that it's going to also impact our stress level. And that's kind of what we go to next. The most critical step in low stress livestock handling, and this can be applied to cattle. This can be applied to training horses. I have a passion for raising and training stock horses, cow horses. And it can be applied to the sheep and goat industry as well. But we need to manage levels of stress. And it's critical that we learn to control our own personal level of stress. And stress is really goes hand in hand with anxiety, which both of those can manifest into a temper. And those manifest directly into the actions and the temperament of the cattle. So the way that we act in turn directly impacts the way that the cattle are going to respond. And that goes back to that additive behavior that we talked about just a little bit earlier. Then, and I think a good practice in learning to manage our level of stress, our level of anxiety, is learning how to manage pressure patterns. Okay. And pressure patterns are simply, it goes back to what Temple Grandin taught in terms of fight or flight, those zones with which we enter into and cause that cow or that calf or that bull to move away from us or turn into fight. So learning how to control those pressure patterns. And we're going to be probably, I think the majority of the time tonight, we're going to spend talking about the cow-calf industry, because I think there's more opportunity there for us to really delve into that, because I think the majority of us are probably cow-calf producers on this tonight. But all of this is related to the stocker program, replacement heifers, and even our herd sires. So the cow-calf industry, it's our number one industry within the state. We're feeder calf producers, and there's potential stress levels are the highest during these times that I have listed. First, it's the forced or encouraged movement. How do we get cattle to move? So we can initiate stress if we don't approach cattle in the proper way when we want to move them, say from the pasture to the gate, to the handling facility, from the corral, and then from the corral into the handling facility. One of the areas that cattle tend to become the most stressed in a cow-calf scenario is at calving. And I think, this is worth spending just a little bit of time on. Over the last probably 10 years, we've had something that's probably been introduced and causes more stress to the mama cow, and in turn more danger to the handler, and that's the black vultures. And I want you to think about this, and I want you to always be careful and be wary when you go out to tag a newborn calf. And tagging that newborn calf is an important management practice that we need to do. We may even be dipping the navel in some betadine. We may be castrating that calf at birth if we have help with us. We may be doing several things, and it's important that we do those things. But always be aware. I'll give you one example here at the research center. We catch our calves at birth or shortly after, and we tag them and do those management practices. And we've had some cows that year after year given us no problem. Well, with the black vultures kind of coming into this area in Spring Hill about 8, 9, 10 years ago, they start harassing these newborn calves and even the cows as they're trying to calve. Well, these cows get up and through maternal instinct, they want to protect their calf. Well, they in turn get amped up and stressed and become very aggressive to chase those buzzards off. Well, they chase the buzzards off, and then we show up to catch the calf and tag the calf. Well, what happens? That additive behavioral impact that they experience from the incident with the buzzards now turned on us, the handler, and they'll actually become very aggressive towards us. So it really magnifies the maternal aggression that we're seeing in the mama cows, especially here in this herd. And I know in this herd, it's happened across the state as well, where there are those aggressive black vultures present. So that's something to think about and something to visit about in the future, I think, with our legislatures. Breeding time is important because these cattle are really not paying attention to us. They're running around and mounting each other. And so if we're running a natural service scenario and we've got a herd bull present, that's another level of stress that we need to understand and be able to manage and reduce the stress associated with it. Gathering our calves for the first working at 3 months of age. So the first time those calves run through the chute is going to impact how they go through the chute and respond to us throughout the rest of their lives. So let's think of that as stocker calves that are sold to someone or as replacement heifers that are going to stay in our herd. So as we understand and begin to move those cattle through the processing facilities, let's make sure we handle them right, because that's going to impact how they respond to us throughout the rest of their life on the farm or the ranch. Weaning time is extremely stressful, and we're going to cover a few things that help reduce stress in that area. And then marketing. Marketing is probably way more stressful on us, the managers and the owners, than it is on the livestock. And we see a tremendous amount of stress and negative events occur at marketing time. One of the best things that we can do as beef cattle producers to start managing and training, in essence, I think we have to think of it as training our cow herd to our behaviors and our expectations, is just pasture interaction throughout the year, and really without expecting anything from the herd. Because if those cattle are used to seeing you, it impacts that additive nature of the cattle. So if you're out there and you don't expect anything from them, they know how to be present and to be silent and to go about grazing with you present. And then throughout that process, you can begin practicing positioning yourself within or on the outside perimeter of that herd and just practice moving them around and keeping them at a walk. But one thing that also does for you, being present and taking time to do that, it gives you, it really makes you a better manager. You can observe, if you have any watery eyes so that you can go ahead and treat an eye issue before it becomes a problem. Are there some reproductive events going on where those cows all supposed to be bred, but now we see 4 of them in standing estrus, in a week's period of time? We know something may have gone on or be going on with the bull. So it just makes us better managers to observe those cattle on a regular basis throughout the year without truly expecting anything from them. Then we go back to those pressure points that we talked about just a little bit earlier, and utilizing flight zone. Flight zone, it's become one of the primary talking points, which is true. But I really like to talk about pressure and release. And these are the key concepts in controlling movement. So pressure and release and controlling movement. I utilize that in all my young horse colt and filly training, pressure and release, because it's it's really a reward for the animal to have pressure released. And adding pressure causes movement in one direction or another. So understanding how to add pressure at the right time and release pressure at the right time gives us the ability to move, initiate, and control movement of the cattle herd. In basically, it's imposed force applied and released to affect positive movement while controlling the herd's direction, speed, and anxiety. And you notice I've got three things here: direction, so we want them to go a particular way. We want them to go at a certain speed. And in doing that, we're controlling their level of anxiety or their level of stress. But also we have to control our stress to make those direction and speed impacts upon the herd. And honestly, probably one of the most important keys there is speed. If we can keep that herd walking at a pace walking, we can control the direction of those cattle. So in essence, we've gathered these cattle, two people, out of a 50-acre pasture, and we're directing them towards the exit of this pasture. And obviously, we're going to conduct a management practice. And I think at this particular time, we were taking them in for their initial estrus protocol, which we were going to put cedars in and give a dose of GnRH to begin the estrus synchronization process for timed artificial insemination. And one thing that you're going to notice here, it can become very stressful from a cow-calf scenario because we've got mama cows with fairly young calves, and so that can become chaotic as well. So if we can control our anxiety, that helps control the anxiety of the cow, because not only are they being moved, but they're also worried about where their calf is. Infrastructure design is extremely important, and we're not going to talk a lot about this because of time, the time that we have, but just gate location. Think of that if you're in the process of designing pastures, new pastures, putting new fence in. Think about where you locate your gates. Your gates need to probably be in the corners of the pastures, right? We're going to talk about that in just a minute when we talk about 3 points of pressure principle. And also think about the swing pattern. Going back, when we exit this pasture, you notice the gate is swung outside into the exterior portion. If that gate were swung to the inside, what's the first thing these calves are going to do? They're going to run right here and not be able to get to mama, and they're going to start bawling, and then those mama cows are going to become more stressed. That maternal aggression may come out. They're going to come back through that gate. So think about the way that our swing pattern is and the way that we hang our gates and make sure they can swing both ways. Just natural path of movement, utilize the fence as a boundary. And again, think about fence as a boundary. And we're going to talk about this with the 3 points of pressure principle here in just a minute. Cattle love to walk the same way and follow one another, right? That's why we have those cow paths. They're in every pasture. And if you're out there riding an ATV or a side-by-side or a pickup truck, if you go across the cow path, you're going to know it, right? Because it's going to be a pretty rough ride. Avoid exit of pastures going through creeks, ditches, gullies, thickets, or things of that nature, if at all possible. But if you have to, know how and have a clear path through those, because cattle do like to hide when it comes to starting, whenever they become stressed. They'll want to go hide from you, and they are really good at hiding from you. And I don't know how many times people have commented about, why do cattle always go in ponds when I try to get them up? Well, they know that they can get away from you there, and they've probably done it in the past. And so it's that additive effect or that additive behavior. So if at all possible, when we gather our cattle, let's avoid going in those areas where they can, in essence, hide from us. And because they do act as a draw for the cattle when they are stressed. The first thing that we need to do is assemble the herd. Cattle are herding animals, though there's some variation in that compared to maybe some remudas or or flocks of sheep. There's some variation in that, but they're still herding animals. They like companionship. So the first thing we need to do is to go to all four corners of the pasture and gather them as one group before we attempt to move those cattle towards the pens. And then we want to adjust pressure to the direction with which we want those cattle to go. And so we've all heard, and we've all seen the pictures and the diagrams of one cow, and the point of directional movement is where? That point of balance is the shoulder, right? The shoulder blade. So if we're in front of the shoulder blade of a cow, near her head, she is going to move backwards. If we pass that shoulder blade and are behind that shoulder blade, that cow is going to move forward. So think of that. But also, when we gather that herd as a whole, we as handlers over time, and we learn this too by, about 5 slides earlier when I talked about just being within the herd and expecting no interaction, we really understand that point of balance within the herd as a whole. So if we can think of the whole herd as one individual cow and identify the pivot point within that, then it makes it easier to keep that group of cows as one unit and then impact the movement and the direction with which we want to take. And then that's where we get to what I like to term 3 points of pressure principle. I don't know that that's an official management practice, but that's one that I've kind of coined over the years and like to utilize. And if we can maintain 3 points of pressure on one cow, one bull, or 1,000 cows or 1,000 bulls, we can control the direction with which they go. And this is basically a little visual diagram of how that happens. And if you'll see here, and we talked earlier about good infrastructure. So a good fence probably does more for controlling stress in a cow herd than anything that we can do. If we have a fence that has holes in it, what's the first thing they're going to do? They're going to find those holes and they're going to go through them, because when we turn a set of cows out into a fresh pasture, what do? They walk the fence, not once probably, but twice. And the reason they're doing that, they're exploring their boundaries. And if they find holes in that fence, they'll know they can escape, and they're always going to be looking for those holes. And once they escape, we've got to go gather them. That's a stressful event for us. That's stressful for them, and it goes back to that additive behavior impact for future handling. So good fences are extremely important. And you can see right here in this picture, we're utilizing this near fence and this far fence as 2 pressure points, and this person on the horse as a 3rd pressure point. And we're directing these cattle down the lane. Now that you notice that one of us has moved up here into the front, because this pressure point is about to end with this 90-degree turn in the fence. So then we have to become the pressure point to avoid these cattle turning right and going back here towards the dumpster and behind the barn. So we've got this fence continuing down as 1 pressure point, the rider behind is a pressure point, and then I become a pressure point here to control the cattle moving down in the direction that we want them to. And I think it's important to note that I was in front of these cattle at a slower pace, maintaining a walk to keep these cattle walking. And then I just moved up here into this 3rd pressure point position as we went forward. Pasture to corral, maintain the entire herd at a walking pace. That is so important. Used to talk about things that we wish we could do and we knew we could do. Well, I really think, we could take a herd of cows down the streets of Nashville or New York City or wherever you want, if we can maintain them at a walk. If cattle get to running, they get nervous, they get stressed, they start splitting off from each other, and there's no horse fast enough, there's no ATV nimble enough to control that herd at that time. But if we can control through utilizing those 3 points of pressure, the pace with which they walk, that controls their anxiety level and the direction that we can take them. So that's the key. And that takes practice, keeping these cattle at a walk. Ideal movement patterns, they vary. However, the most effective is working the sides. So, one thing I want you to note here, we've got a good fence on this area. This is actually about a 15-acre pasture, and these cattle came from a 50-acre pasture. So we came from a 50-acre pasture into a 25-acre pasture, and then we're going to actually exit out a gate that's in the corner up here. And I actually did that with just me, myself, and I. Well, actually, a good horse and me. And we were able to maintain 3 points of pressure by moving from the back to the side and having a good, solid fence the entire time. So this can be done on our own if we're limited in labor and if we do it right. And one of the best ways to do that is working from the side. And so what that does, that keeps cattle strung out. It keeps cattle moving in the direction with which we want them to. And it also controls the speed. So if the cattle get to moving a little fast, we just move up front to past the point of that shoulder, right? That point of balance. And we slow down those cattle in the front. And that's going to initiate a slowdown in those cattle in the middle and behind. And the reason that works is it's really about hierarchy. The more dominant cows within the herd stay in the middle. The least dominant cows stay in the front and stay in the back. And that makes sense, right? Because if you think about it, in nature, inherently, survival, the Lord put the survival instinct, first and foremost in the minds of cattle. Because those behind will get eaten by grizzly bears. Those in front will get surprised by the mountain lions. Well, if we stay here in the middle, we're going to be okay, right? So the most dominant cattle tend to stay in the middle. And that's why we can line cattle out or string cattle out when we're moving them, and it's very impactful. And that's also the reason that you see those cow paths formed in the pasture fields. They're not moving all as one big unit. They're moving really in a single file strung out type or lined out type manner. So pay attention to the hierarchy of that herd and use it to our benefit when we're moving cattle from point A to point B. And always be patient. So practicing patience is one of the most important things that we can do in the livestock business. And that goes back to what we talked about earlier in maintaining our anxiety level, learning to control our anxiety. And I still get extremely, extremely anxious when it comes to this point of exit out of a pasture, right? Because so many things could go wrong. And if I get too anxious and I'm on this horse is going to get anxious and we may cause too much pressure here. If I'm on a four-wheeler, I'm going to probably move a little too close and rev that engine a little too loud, and that's going to cause pressure here and some issues. So if we can practice patience, we're going to allow that normal hierarchy, that normal dominance level to exit out of this opening into the direction we're going to want them to go. So why is this so often the point where things go bad? Well, this particular pasture here is a 45-acre pasture. So we've gathered these cattle, we've moved them out of a 45-acre pasture. Now we expect them to go through this 14-foot opening, right? And too often we as producers, so it may be time to go ahead and breed these cows. We purchase all this semen. We've got to get them up here and got to get them bred. We don't want to miss a cow one, right? Or if this is a set of steers and we're selling them today, so this is our one chance for a good paycheck throughout the year. So we're anxious and we've gotten to this point, so we rush and start pushing these cattle through this gate. Well, we start mixing those dominance levels. And if these less dominant cows move into the more dominant cows are going to turn and start pushing back. And then that causes cattle to bleed back on us. And maybe we can't control them, so maybe we don't get them all up that day. But if we stand back and just apply a constant bit of pressure without causing a disturbance in the flow through the gate, these cattle are going to follow each other. And as you can see, it becomes really critical when we've got these young calves. These calves are probably about 60 days old, and the youngest probably about 30 days old. So that's kind of like herding cats if they're by themselves. So we need them to maintain a normal herd movement and follow their mothers through that gate. So patience is so critical, and that takes practice. So once we've got the cattle to the crowding pens, that's probably the most dangerous time and the most critical factor, okay, that we have when we get there is a concern for safety, because we've gone from an open pasture to a more confined area. So how can we control the stress level of the livestock, of the cattle that we're handling when we get to those more crowded areas, such as the crowding pens, and going into the sweep tub or the bud box and then down to the single file alley? Well, point A here, the most critical factor to be aware of is knowing how many cattle will fit into that system. So if we've got a corral or a holding pen that'll hold 25 cows, and we try to put 50 in there, we're going to cause damage to the facility, potential injury to the calves, and a significant risk that we may hurt ourselves just simply because of overcrowding. So know how many cattle will fit into your system and only take that many. A handler positioning is so critical. And I always talk about positioning is more critical and impactful than movement and noise. Okay, so too often we want to holler and wave our hands or flags or rattle paddles, but those cattle know where we're at, and we can whistle or speak in a normal voice, and they know exactly where we're at. So our positioning is way more critical and impactful than any wild movements or noises that we make. And honestly, noise and erratic movement can actually cause cattle to harm themselves or turn and harm us. Level of injury, of course, continues as we become more confined into that facility. So the next thing I think is important, and I'll have a picture to show you here in just a second, and probably the most critical factor is awareness of matching the number of cattle to the system, and that system being the number of cattle that will fit into. So if you'll look at this picture, this is a larger holding pen, and we have to have a distinct understanding of how many will fit. And this is kind of a modified bud box system that we have up here that I'm taking these cattle to. And I know that 5 head will fit into the single file alley that's in front of this modified bud box. So how many am I taking? I'm taking 4. So if I know 5 will fit, I'm going to take 1 less. If I know 6 will fit, I'm only going to take 5. If I know 3 will fit, I'm only going to take 2. Because if you want to think about it from a stress standpoint, if you get into a heavy traffic type situation or scenario on the interstate, it's a lot. It's very easy for you to lose your temper, right? And for the drivers around you to lose your temper, because we are coming into a congested type situation. Well, the same thing happens with cattle, and they will become anxious and try to escape that really congested type situation. So if we take fewer than will fit, that leaves it more open and gives them more opportunity to naturally flow into that bud box system, and then from the bud box system into the single file alley. And if we do that and keep stress levels low there, we're going to be so much more impactful with the vaccines that we give them, with the artificial insemination program that we may be conducting, and also more impactful on how they respond next time we take them into the facility. So it's so important to know how many to take in. Another thing that I like to utilize, and as you can tell, we've got the estrus alert packages on these cattle, so they're going through an estrus synchronization program. And since we've got some of them that you can see are actually activated, this means that they're going through the system for the 3rd time. They're in here for the breeding portion of the estrus synchronization program. So these 3 cows are on their way to get bred artificially. Most every time I gather the cattle, or we gather cattle here at the research center or growing up, we always sort the calves off ahead of time. And typically what happens is these calves will actually, it's kind of like cream. For those of you that grew up milking a cow, and you go to the refrigerator the next morning, that cream has risen to the top. Those calves tend to be where these two calves are, right at the front of the cow herd with the cows back here. So we can peel those calves off fairly easy. So it accomplishes a couple of things. It allows us to get those younger calves out of the way so they don't become injured by being stepped on, but it also teaches them how to be sorted off. And so if they learn over time how to be sorted off, that makes it easier each time we handle these calves to be sorted off. And then third, what it does, it teaches them that they can be separate from mom without, any real bad impact. So at weaning time, it actually makes the weaning process a bit easier and a bit less stressful because they know they can be separated from mom without any dire impact. So we like to do that. And what that also does, it allows these cattle to be moved out of this corner towards these calves because we call that a draw. They're drawn towards their calves. Now, obviously, we move them past to take them up here to be processed, but they exit out and then they can come back here and be near their calves. So utilizing draws, sorting calves off, a lot of positive things can come from teaching these calves to be sorted off. Handler positioning, as we mentioned earlier, is so critical to what we're trying to do. It's more and more impactful than force or noise. Very little is ever accomplished with a paddle, a whip, or a stick. I don't use any of those whenever I'm handling cattle on horseback or if I'm handling cattle on foot. It's our understanding of our positioning and its effect on the directional movement of the cattle that really makes the biggest impact. Another thing, these paddles, whips, and sticks, they can turn into weapons. And we talked about advocacy earlier, people watching that truly don't understand the concept of handling cattle. So they can become crutches and they can become weapons if we happen to lose our temper. And so we want to avoid that. Now, I'm not saying it's wrong to utilize those. And if you have a sense of comfort and protection from having those, then that's good. Please utilize those. But really, just our positioning, where we're located within that herd, and is really more impactful than anything or any paddle, whip, or stick that we might have. The same goes with vocalizing. Too many people over vocalize, and so I think there's some relationship with the way these cattle respond to noise. So loud noises, metal rattling, or hollering tend to confuse cattle because they don't always know which direction that sound is coming from. So that can cause them to react negatively and not be, moving in that direction that we want them to. Just a single syllable type noise or whatever proper term that is, like a whistle, like just a one directional whistle or a calm sound, they're going to hear that. They're going to know where it's coming from, and they're going to move away from it most of the time. So think of it that way, and just avoid the hollering if you can. And that goes back to advocacy. If you have neighbors that don't really understand the livestock industry and they hear you out there hollering, sometimes words that are spelled with 4 letters, they might often get a bad connotation of folks that own cattle. And we don't want that to be the case, because folks that own cattle tend to be salt of the earth, in my opinion. The result of proper cattle handling, it's impactful on all the things that we talked about, primarily safety, and then additive behavior, and then being advocates for the industry. So one thing that I want you to kind of notice, and I hope this video plays for you, and let's see if it does. This is a set of cattle that have just gone through the estrus synchronization process. No, the breeding process, the estrus synchronization process. We just put semen in this set of cows, and it's not going to play. So what I will tell you, let's see if I can do this. So it's not going to play, but this is a set of cows that we've just brought in from the pasture. We've put them through the handling process. We've sorted the calves off. So now the calves have been reintroduced to the cows. So you can see this little easy breed cedar up here handle. That's a vaginal insert. So they've been through the chute. They've received an injection of GnRH. We've put the progesterone containing intervaginal cedar, easy breed cedar, into the vagina of the cow. We've released them from the working facility. We've reunited them with their calves. And so this video shows a set of cows there's absolutely no noise. It's extremely quiet. There's no bawling. And I think we actually counted about 6 of these cows already chewing their cud. And if you think about it, one way to really observe cattle that are not stressed are cattle that are regurgitating and remasticating the food or the forages they've consumed earlier that day. That's the way the Lord created them, to be on the watch out and graze and store up that forage until they're in a stress-free environment where they can relax, and then they can begin the digestion process. So these cattle have been through a lot that day, and so there's absolutely no noise, and there's a lot of these cattle already chewing their cud. So that's a result of low stress cattle handling, and I wish I could get that to play, but I don't think I'm going to be able to. So I apologize for that. So really, the final screen is just another set that we're done working with, and I welcome any questions that you might have, and I welcome any opportunity that you have to come and visit us out here at the Middle Tennessee Research and Education Center, or any of the events that we host. I like to go out to real farms, out in the country and gather people's cattle. I'll be down in Alabama this Saturday at Kennemer Feed Yards. It's a stocker operator down there, and I'm taking one of my horses, and we're gonna gather stocker steers from the pasture into a holding pen, and from the holding pen to a handling facility, and we're going to demonstrate some of the low stress methods that we utilize, because it really does make a difference. But the biggest impact it makes is it makes it more enjoyable for us as handlers. It makes us better stewards of the livestock that we have the privilege to work with each and every day, and it makes us more impactful for the folks that we're really working for, those folks that we're feeding, producing this protein for. Are there any questions? Katie, I'll kind of turn it back over to you to see how we need to facilitate that.
Yeah, that sounds great. So anybody that has questions, feel free to put those in the Q&A. I see a couple have already popped up here, so I'm going to read those. The first one, Kevin, is someone says that they have a German Shepherd that somehow knows how to move cattle. He's never been trained properly, but somehow does it. How do cows respond with stress to dogs? Is this something you would or wouldn't recommend?
Yeah, then that's a great question. So what I would state is, if those cattle are used to the dog and the dog does not stress them out and the dog moves them in the direction that you desire them to go and assist you, I think that's wonderful. I would love to have the opportunity to have a dog that was good enough to work with me and my horse. Then I really think we could do anything with any size herd that we had. But it goes back to that additive behavior that we talked about just a bit earlier. So if that German Shepherd, say, was really aggressive towards that set of cattle, they're going to remember that, and they're probably going to respond negatively and always move away from that German Shepherd, or become aggressive and start the fight portion of that. But if that German Shepherd's understands cattle movement, and you can facilitate that in a manner with which is not stressing the cattle and helping you as a handler out, I'm all for that. I love to watch good stock dogs work, and I think it's extremely beneficial, but it takes training. It goes back to that additive effect. Not all cattle are going to respond the same to a dog. It just depends on what interaction they've had previously. So if you've got the right kind of dog, yes. If you don't, there's nothing worse, I would say.
All right, great. So lots of great questions popping up here. There was another one about using cattle dogs. I'm going to mark that one as answered, but if you have any more questions, certainly put them back up here.
Yeah.
Another question that came in Is there a minimum number of head or acreage that utilizing horses would require?
Absolutely not. So the big thing about the horse situation is, and I like to teach this, is horses really are impactful in teaching us to control our anxiety level, because a horse, and that's really why I appreciate the horse. I tell everybody I'm a horseman because I'm a cattleman, and I'm a cattleman because I'm a horseman, right? And so a horse can kind of feel your heartbeat, know your anxiety level when you're 4 or 5 feet away from it. And if you're on the back of that horse, then that your anxiety level is going to transfer through that horse and then impact the cattle that you're handling. So it's really a good teacher of how to control our anxiety level. That makes us a better horseman, and in turn makes us a better cattle handler. And I will go out and gather one cow off 1 acre with a horse before I go out there and walk, because I don't like to walk, and I would rather ride a horse than do it. Or I can go out and gather 150 head of cattle, off of a 250, 300 acre pasture with a horse. So really, it depends upon your desire. Now, do you have to ride a horse to do it? No, absolutely not. You can walk. You can have a side by side. You can have a four-wheeler. You can have a truck. It's just understanding those points of pressure, and they vary. The horse is quiet. The horse has a lot of lateral movement benefits, whereas a four-wheeler or a side by side, we can't really laterally move, right? So we have to make circles to turn around, or we have to stop and put it in reverse and make noise changes in that engine, that internal combustion engine. So that impacts the behavior of the cattle. So we just need to know how close that we are, how close we can get before we elicit a negative response. So no, if I've got a half an acre and one cow, I'm going to hop on that horse and go gather that cow. But it goes back to to appreciation for the old ways, but also how those old ways manifest in better management, even in with the new practices that we have, especially that we get to work with every day in agricultural research.
All right, kind of to follow up with that, and I think you sort of touched on it there. Are there any changes in these principles of movement and handling for a very small herd, just a group of 3 to 5 cows on a small farm?
Yeah, so what's really neat with 3 to 5 cows, sometimes that can be way more difficult than a group of 100 cows, because if we've got 3 to 5 cows, we have more opportunity to spoil them rotten, right? And so then they can develop their own little attitudes and understand how to take advantage of us. So we need to teach our cattle how to be driven. I've got some friends that own just a few cows, and do a great job with them. Great animal husbandry folks. And one of the things that I saw was they were having difficulty moving those cattle to the handling facility, because they were trying to get them to follow them with feed, or they were trying to go out there and halter those cattle and then bring them to. Well, those cattle, after they went through the estrus synchronization process, I went out there to help them breed these cattle, understood that whenever I showed up, something negative was going to happen, right? Negative, that additive behavior that we talked about. And then they didn't want to move towards the working pens because they knew I was there. And so I said, hey, let's teach these cattle how to be driven. That's more important. So just understanding how to teach cattle to be moved in the direction that you want by adding that pressure is so impactful. And so it doesn't necessarily change, but sometimes it does become more difficult if we're just moving a few head. Now, if we're trying to sort off 2 head out of a group of 200, it can become very difficult, because that other 198 head are actually draws to those 2 head. So then we have to really become very keen and focused on how we place ourselves to move those cattle away from that herd. And with that situation, a horse makes it a lot easier, because we have those lateral movements versus trying to move on foot really fast or turn a circle on a four-wheeler. So I hope that answered that question.
All right. Excuse me, I'm going to combine a couple questions here because I think they go well together. The first part is, would it be better to have curves in your fence or square corners to help move cattle? And then along with that, are there resources within Extension that can assist with handling facility designs?
There are, I'll start with the latter. There are some really good designs within the extension publications. There's some that go back for many years that are tried, tested, and true. And there are some more modern facility designs out there. And there's also the opportunity just to give me a call and we can help you through that process as you're doing that. And so super, super good question. A question that often comes up out in the pasture field, is it appropriate to have curves or 90-degree corners? Well, properties are different, right? And we don't want to give up too much property. So often we have to go ahead and build our fence along the boundary. So it has to be maybe a 90-degree corner. So typically in pasture fields, it doesn't matter if you have abrupt 90-degree corners, or even if you have very sharp corners. It's just based on how you approach the cattle to get them to exit out of that corner. I really like the 90-degree corners because what that does, if you have a set of cattle that are flighty, so if I go out to a herd that has some issues with disposition and speed, and the handler or people haven't been able to get those cattle up, I would rather have those 90-degree corners, because what happens is those cattle follow the fence. They come to that corner and then they slow down. So it gives me the opportunity to help that fence in that corner to assist me in slowing those cattle down to that walk and not getting away. If we have the curves there, and they've built up momentum because they're trying to get away, they're going to follow that curve on around and maintain or increase that speed. But we can't always do that, right? So we have to work with what we have. So within, as we get into a more confined situation, I think just by the way that we have to build our working facilities in barns, the bud box design works really well, and it has those 90-degree corners in it. That sometimes can become negative, especially if you think about the sweep system and what Temple Grandin talks about. She likes those sweeping curves that lead into the single file alley. With many of the barns in the state of Tennessee being old tobacco barns, right, and pole barns, we can't necessarily put a sweep system in without giving up a lot of square footage, usable square footage. So that's why the bud box design works really well. And it takes advantage of the natural movement of cattle. They go into the bud box, we close the gate behind them. They in turn reach an end point, which is two 90-degree turns in a flat panel, or 90-degree corners in a flat panel, the end of a rectangle. And then they turn and want to come back the way they entered, right? That's just natural. If we can't go further, we want to go back the way we came. Well, we've closed that gate behind them. We've positioned ourselves on the inside of that half circle that they're going to turn to get around us. And all of a sudden they see the opening to that single file alley and they direct themselves up into there. So in essence, we become that sweeping turn, but we still have those 90-degree corners. And I've got a few slides I wish I could pull up to show you that concept, but I really don't mind corners. I really like corners. And I'll tell you this, a lot of people love round pens to train horses in. I love rectangular or square pens to train horses in, because it gives me the opportunity to train that horse where it pays attention to me and not necessarily the structure with which they're in. And we can also do that with cattle.
What about any books that you recommend about either probably low stress handling or facility design?
Wow, that's a good question. So the books I learned from were Bill Thompson and R.C. Thompson back many years ago. so I apologize. I don't really have any books to reference that. There's a lot of articles out there. I'm not necessarily advertising any articles that I've written, but I've written several for the Tennessee Cattlemen's Association and things of that nature. But there's a lot of people that do a lot of good writing. Temple Grandin's got some awesome facility designs. I would suggest you look her up as an author. She's also got a lot of good commentary and publications on really low stress cattle handling. She's kind of the guru of that, I think. don't necessarily agree with everything that she talks about, and I'm sure she would definitely disagree with a lot of what I talk about. But I think everything that she does talk about is very impactful and works, and she's a great steward of the livestock industry. So that's one. There are others out there. You can look a lot of it up on YouTube, and you can just watch, and all of a sudden you can tell if they kind of know what they're talking about, or they don't. But I apologize for not having any direct references.
All right, there's one last question here. Somebody mentioned that Greg Judy uses a mature steer when he brings new steers onto his farm under contract grazing. Is there a better way to drop the stress of new cows when you bring them on a new farm?
That's a great way to do it. We call that the old Judas goat method, right? So a lot of the old packing plants and utilized, a Judas goat, they called them, but actually they were a big steer that led cattle into, that final alley where they were harvested. And what that does, that in essence, all it's doing, it's giving the new arrivals within that environment something to follow. And it's not necessarily reducing stress, but its ultimate goal and impact will be to reduce stress, because it's going to build that additive effect of allowing those cattle to know how to get to the feed bunks so that they can satiate that hunger that they have, to how to find the water system so they can satiate that thirst that they have. And then in turn, what that does, whenever cattle feel their hunger need and their thirst need, that dramatically drops stress. And when we do that, we impact the health of the cattle. And this is really important in the stocker industry, getting those cattle to the feed bunk and the watering systems as quick as you can if you want to reduce the death loss and if you want to maximize the pounds of gain that you have in that first 30 days after arrival. So that's a super good method that really, really works. You just have to have the right steer to do that, because not all steers are going to do exactly what you want them to, but that's really a great method. But one thing that I did, and I grew up stockering a lot of cattle, is just sitting on horseback, being among those new arrivals when they're there, allowing them to get adjusted to me, and they're going to come up and they're going to sniff that horse. They don't necessarily see the horse as a horse and something threatening. They see it as a larger, more dominant cow, just like they saw that steer you talked about. And that allows me to adjust my position and move those cattle to the feed bunk and move those cattle to the water and get them adjusted to their new environment, in turn reducing stress and improving potential profit. So hope that helps.
All right, we've got a question here asking if UT Ag has a set of plans for a handling system. I'm going to put a link into the chat there that's got all of the publications that UT Beef and Forage Center has on handling and facility design. Now, certainly they're probably not going to have just one design that works for everybody. And those publications may be a little bit dated, but they're a good resource to start with. And of course, like Kevin mentioned, he'd be happy for folks to reach out if they had questions about their individual operation.
Yeah, and Katie, I'd also tell you that the facility in Lewisburg or the facility here in Spring Hill, if you're in the area, please stop by, and I'll be glad to show you our handling facilities. And they're adapted into barns that pre-existed. So we've added those into barns that may be very similar to what you're looking at doing. And we've got one in Lewisburg that's really state of the art. Really designed to be a cattle handling facility, and we can run, about 300 head of heifers through there in any type of management practice, and just a really low stress manner and have holding pens. So please feel free to stop in, and we'd be glad to show you those as well, because the plans that you're going to find don't necessarily 100% fit the environment and the structure you're going to go into, but you can implement changes to fit your existing structures.
All right, very good. Does anybody have any remaining questions? Those were all really great questions. I'm glad to see folks asking stuff, and having good conversations. So any last questions? Be quick for the night. All right, I don't see any more popping up. Kevin, thank you so much for sharing tonight.
Absolutely.
We really appreciate this information, even if it seems like, we've heard it before. It's always good to be reminded and have fresh
Yep.
ideas on it. So really appreciate you being with us. And that is all we had for tonight. So we'll see
Very
y'all
good.
next Tuesday for the next webinar.
All right. Thank y'all.